Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Well, Michael, it's been a while since we have been together for our generation, From Our Generation.
Good morning.
Yes, it is August 8th, 2025. And today we're going to be talking about four topics that relate and overlap with each other. One is citizenship. What is citizenship? One is statehood. What is statehood? And then what is sovereignty, which includes both of those as well as country and global. So we're going to be talking about those things, and then we're going to be talking about media branding and how the media handles these subjects within their own brand.
You know, what really intrigues me about this is that these are not obvious connections. We've got big disputes over these very things.
Huge.
And they're very poorly described or defined. And so we fight intensely over things that I think we don't have a good grasp on.
Okay.
So that's what I'm hoping to do is to develop some insights into how these things can be better understood.
Okay, so we've talked about these terms. So let's first of all define the terms from the standpoint, even to the extent where there's a dispute. So, for example, the first term or the first subject is citizenship. How do we define citizenship?
So, the obvious controversy there is this upcoming decision about birthright citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
You're a citizen of a country you're born in, generally, if you're subject to the laws of that country. But diplomatic children, are not citizens of the country where the diplomat is serving. For instance, there's exceptions to this rule. And so, it can be defined by go ahead.
Well, now let me just push back here. If an American tourist is in another country, and the tourist has a child. That child, this is not diplomatic immunity. This is not diplomatic. This is just being. If you're a tourist, that child in no country except perhaps our country, the United States, is that child considered a citizen of that country.
And it's a vigorous business in the United States because people know that they can get their children like a lifetime benefit. They win the lottery.
They think. And that
has been the case.
And that has been the case. And that's now going to be
challenged.
It has been challenged. Now it's going to be determined by the Supreme Court how the U.S. defines what a citizen is.
Yes.
Yeah. And each country, I think what we're saying is each country has a definition of what it is to be a citizen of that country.
Yes. And it relates to things like parenthood. Of course, where are they citizens? It relates to ethnicity in some cases. Like historically, to be French was to be ethnically French, right? To even a holdover from old tribal patterns, right? In Israel, you don't have to be from Israel. A lot of Russians have gone there and become Israeli citizens,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's subject to law that describes how a citizen is formed. So that's what we're fighting over is what is our law going to say for the indefinite future. There's been ambiguity in the past, and so we're going to have to resolve it.
Right. And so let's just lay that out. What Trump has done is Trump has defined a citizen as I don't know that he's defined what a citizen is. He is saying what a citizen is not. And that is if you are the child of an illegal immigrant, if you are a child who is born in this country, who is the child of illegal immigrants, that is people who have not gone through any process at all to be here, that child is not a citizen of the United States, even though that child is born. And the logic that Trump is applying, which the Supreme Court will determine whether or not that logic is true or not, is that the parents are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States because they're here illegally. Yeah. That they are subject to the jurisdiction of the country from which they came. That's the logic That's the logic that Trump is applying. Now, there is a court case from I believe it's 1898, where the Supreme Court ruled that the child of a person who was here legally, that person gave birth to a child, and the Supreme Court ruled that even though that person was not a U.S. citizen, because that person was here legally, that person was subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and therefore the child was a U.S. citizen. So now the question is, does that same logic apply to people who give birth to a child here and the parents are here illegally?
So to me, the phrase subject to jurisdiction is very vague. It's ambiguous. What does it mean? Even tourists that come here have to follow our laws. You'll get arrested even if you're not a citizen, right? And so is that what it means to be subject to the laws? Probably not for the purposes of defining citizenship. They must have something else in mind, because that just doesn't get very far. The other one is, I think that this came about after the Civil War,
yes,
when they were trying to make it clear that black people, slaves, were not denied citizenship because Former slaves, yes. People who had been slaves would be citizens.
Yeah, not black people.
Okay, fair enough.
But former slaves, because black
I was
people,
equating the two, but yes,
black people in the
better.
North were citizens.
Yes.
Slaves were not considered citizens by the southern states.
This is one of the reasons I'm not a lawyer, because I don't think that precisely. And I had equated the two, the slaves and blacks.
Yeah.
But it was mostly blacks in the South who had been formerly enslaved. They were trying to make sure they had the right to be citizens.
Right.
And so now the language that they use for that purpose is at the root of our controversy today about illegal immigrants who very much chose to be here, unlike slaves who were forced to be here.
Well, but it's not whether or not they were forced to be here or not was determining the language. What they wanted to do was they wanted to say that slaves, now that they were free, were subject to all the laws of the United States. And that meant that they also benefited by being subject to the laws of the United States. And
they would be protected by those laws.
They were protected by those laws. So it worked. That phrase worked both ways. But it was as you point out, it was after the Civil War, and citizenship was defined in that amendment. And it wasn't just it's I believe it says that a citizen who is born in this country and subject to the laws thereof.
Right.
And so that's what the controversy is. It's not the first part of the phrase, but the second, because it doesn't say or, it says and. And so it's both. And so that's what the Supreme Court is going to determine. Now, by the way, once the Supreme Court determines that then will be the definition of what it means to be what a citizen is.
Yes.
So Marco Rubio, for example, has said, if you're here on a student visa, you are not a citizen. You don't have the rights of a U.S. citizen. You're here on a visa where you are here at our invitation. And that if you behave in ways that are antithetical to our way of life, and that doesn't necessarily mean you commit crimes, property crimes or violent crimes. If you espouse violence, an American citizen might have the free speech right to call for an uprising. But Marco Rubio says that if you are here on a student visa and you are a guest and you are advocating the overthrow of a college administration or demonstrations that stop the university from performing its function, that you can be removed. And that's what this the student from Columbia, I'm blanking on his name, Khalil, but anyway, that case is ongoing.
Yes.
To determine if you're here on a visa, what are your rights as a visitor? Does a visitor have the same constitutional rights as a citizen?
Yes. Yeah, that's an important point. I was going to say there's a bunch of consequences of this, but two that seem most critically important to me are eligibility for public benefits, which is a fiscal issue, our ability to pay our bills and be solvent financially. But the other one is voting and representation in general. Who gets to vote and who gets to elect our citizenry. So you have just within the last week a move to have a new census, which would exclude counting people who are not citizens.
Yes, but now you made a comment that let's tighten that up a little
Okay.
bit.
Mm-hmm.
This is not about whether or not the illegal immigrant has a right to vote. That's not what the new census is designed to say. We're not going to count illegal immigrants in the population that determines apportionment
Yes.
of Congress. So this isn't about their right to vote. It's about how many members of the House any particular state has.
And what share of federal benefits that they get is tied to that.
And yes.
How many votes in the Electoral College they have to elect a president, that's tied to that.
Yes. But it's not whether or not the illegal immigrant has a right to vote.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but I do know some states have tried to, or cities have tried to grant the franchise, is the language they would use, the right to vote to people that are not citizens.
For the city.
But
not federal elections.
They don't have the power to do that, but in their city, that's what they want to do.
Right.
There's some people, I think, would like those people to have a vote at the federal level.
There's some people who would like them to have it, but they legally don't.
Right.
They legally, that at this point is settled law. There are people who are trying to push the envelope and claim it. The state of New York, I believe that maybe it was the city or the state, tried to give illegal immigrants the right to vote. And I believe the courts struck that down. I do not believe that a city. I think some city or some state tried to give illegal immigrants the right to vote in either local or state elections, and I believe either the Supreme Court of New York or the Supreme Court of the United States said no. A non-citizen cannot vote.
Well, even if the law is as it is, as we've just described it, there's a shadow fight going on about how you enforce it, because a lot of immigrants are given a driver's license as soon as they are identified, right? And you don't have to be a citizen to have a driver's license.
That's correct.
Right? But in a lot of places, you vote by showing your driver's license, and there's no further questions asked.
Well, and if you do that, then you have committed a crime.
You have?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of crimes that have been committed that have not been pursued.
Right. But it is criminal.
It's criminal.
It's criminal. It's not. There's not a question whether or not it's criminal or not. And that gets into the question of voter IDs that are then connected to. For example, we live in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. We have to register, and there's a process that we go through to register to vote. When I go vote now, I don't have to give my voter ID card, but I do have to give my driver's license, and they then check that against the voter rolls.
Yes.
And to make sure that I have a right, that I'm registered to vote.
They don't accept your driver's license as enough. It is a first step against a master list.
The first step is you have to register to vote. If you don't register to vote and you're a U.S. citizen, you can't vote.
Right.
You have to register. And but there are other states. There's some states where they don't even check it against voter rolls.
Right.
You just get to vote because you show up with a driver's license. And to me, that's not the way it ought to be. And I'm not even sure that that's the way. I don't think in those states. And the point that you're making is that different states treat it differently. But in federal law, if and this is what happened in the last election in the 2024 election, there were both parties had thousands of lawyers at the various voting places where there was concern in the battleground states that people who did not have the legal right to vote, that they would be voting.
Right.
And so there were thousands of lawyers on both sides to make sure that didn't happen. And so I think that I've not heard either side claim that there was a lot of fraud in the 2024 election.
Yes. So I think we've made the point. There's a lot of really important consequences of this simple, poorly defined concept, in my opinion. What is a citizen?
Well, now it's about to be
clarified.
Defined. Yeah.
The other point I would make before we move on is that in our country, elections are decentralized. that was done by the founders for a reason, because it's hard to get control of something that's not centralized. It's kind of like the idea of not having a strong central government.
Correct.
Because the British couldn't come and take that over easily. They have to take over 50 different states, or
Right.
how many states at the time, right?
States, yeah.
At the time.
Yeah.
But now it would be 50. Decentralization is really hard to tyrannize,
Right.
which was their main concern. So I think it's an asset that we have different rules in different places. I wouldn't want someone listening to this to think that I think, or that you probably think, it's a good idea to centralize all this and get one uniform rule.
No, there need to be a definition of who has the right to vote.
Yes.
In elections.
Yes.
And at the federal level, that is the law. Is you must be a citizen to vote in a federal election. That is the law.
Yes.
Now, whether or not the law is upheld how rigorously,
the way it's implemented and enforced and all that is local.
That depends. Yes, and so now you have. So now we have. So we have. So let's kind of think of the when you think of jurisdiction, the smallest jurisdiction is the individual.
Yes.
The next one is the family. The next one is the town or city. The next one is the state.
There are some, you might say, communities that have, community boards and things like that.
Yeah.
So you could have another level in there, but
yes. Yeah, and there's some things like school boards and things like this. Correct. Right. But I'm saying that generally speaking, the way that we think of it is that we have an individual, individual rights.
Right.
And then you have families, and then, parental rights. You get into discussions about that. And then you have the town or the city that the family lives in. Then you have the state, and then you have the country, and then you have the world. I guess if I want to vote in Nashville, Tennessee, we have communities like Belmead, Berry Hill, Forest Hill. These are different
little cities within the county.
Little towns or little communities within the city of Nashville, and each one of those has a mayor.
Right.
Okay, so you have to live in the geographic area, and you have to be registered to vote in order to vote for the mayor of that little community.
Yes.
And then that community has some level of jurisdiction. It has funds that on how it spends within their community, and so that's kind of how we. And then you have school boards and things like this. But when it comes to citizenship, the big breaks tend to be country and state.
Yes.
So I live in Tennessee, so I have a Tennessee driver's license. I am registered to vote in Tennessee. The fact that I'm registered to vote in Tennessee does not give me the right to vote any place other than Tennessee, even for elections that are national in nature.
At all of your 50 vacation homes around
all of my
the United
50
States?
Vacation homes, yes, and both of the ones in Europe. Okay,
right.
Yeah, which are all in my mind.
Yeah,
and everyone is beautiful.
It.
And
maybe they're just as satisfying and a lot less costly.
The last part is the key. No taxes, no property taxes on a home in my mind. Yeah. And so, at any rate, so it's interesting. And so what you have is and President Trump is pushing the envelope. I'll tell you an interesting story. I met a fellow who had been a Navy SEAL for 20 years, and Navy SEALs have very specific jobs. Their missions are very short and they're very specific. They're either to go in and take somebody out, like Osama bin Laden,
like the dinner.
No, kill them.
Oh, yeah.
Kill them.
Just want to clarify.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I got it.
I'll stop. Or rescue somebody.
Yeah.
So they're very mission oriented. And this fellow had been a Navy SEAL for 20 years. He had been a SEAL team leader for 12. And he said, interestingly enough, he says, the work that we do is extremely dangerous. And he said, and because it's extremely dangerous, everything that we do as we are planning our mission is to mitigate risk to the extent that we can. So I asked him about the rules of engagement. And he said, we always fight legal, always. We never fight fair.
Fair, right.
And I
I
thought
love
that was such an interesting way of expressing how the Navy SEALs operated. Now, by the way, there are a lot of businesses that will push the envelope on what is legal. They know it's not necessarily fair, but it's legal and it's to their advantage.
You and I have been involved in a lot of startups and investment kind of scenarios, and in every one of them, you're looking for what some people call an unfair advantage. I mean, I can do something better than anybody else.
Well, intellectual property is what generally provides smaller companies an advantage, but that's because we want to give people who have a novel idea an opportunity to
exploit it and benefit from it for a time, and then it's everybody's after 17 years. It's brilliant policy.
Yeah.
Been here since the founding. It's in the Constitution.
Yeah. And
so you have patents and trademarks and copyrights. My point is you have to follow the law, but within the law, every investor I know is looking for companies that have an unfair advantage, a better way of doing something that someone else can't copy. Because as you and I both know, if you're not different, you're left to compete on price.
Yeah.
And that's not for great returns.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to apply this to the way Trump is governing as president. And that is that he is pushing the envelope as far as he can to accomplish what he believes is good for America, good for the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in foreign policy. Although when I say pushing the envelope, there's one thing that I think that, when people say the last resort is boots on the ground, some people mean that more than others. I think for Trump, he really means that. Trump does not like putting soldiers in harm's way. Not a military force.
Right.
There might be a SEAL team operation here or there, this type of thing. But boots on the ground. So what he's doing is he is using tariffs as a foreign policy tool to try to get. I mean, he's already has a list of 4 or 5 conflicts that he's managed to either stop from happening, or Pakistan and India were about to go to war over the Kashmir, and Trump said, if you do that, I'm going to impose 50% tariffs on both of you. Well, that caused them to stop and say, well, is it worth that? And they didn't go to war. Yeah. It caused them to think. And so Trump is using
what they have to lose. Generally you go to war thinking about what you're going to win, and both sides lose a lot. What's brilliant to me about his tariff policy is he has exploited the fact that the U.S. is by far the biggest and most valuable market in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to sell into the United States.
Yeah.
And so he's used that to advantage our country in terms of our foreign policy.
Right. But the laws that he is using to implement those policies, or to conceive and implement those policies, those laws have been the same for all previous administrations. Mm-hmm. Barack Obama once famously said, there's no way to get those jobs that have already gone overseas. There's no way to get them back.
Right.
He didn't believe there was. Because he never thought, I don't assume he never thought about using tariffs as a tool to accomplish. I mean, there's now, I don't know how many trillions of dollars have been announced that will be invested. We're going to do a sidecar just for a second, because in the big beautiful bill, there's a section in there that if you buy capital equipment, that means factory equipment. Or actually, it's not just factory; it's capital equipment. Like this desk is capital equipment. But in a factory, new equipment to make things, if you buy it and install it and pay for it between now and the end of 2028, so it's a short horizon, then you get to deduct 100% of the cost of that equipment for tax purposes.
Okay.
And so what you're going to see, that is a huge. That's a huge incentive. Good word. Huge incentive to go ahead and buy capital equipment and to build factories and buy capital equipment, and the equipment that they buy will be the most modern equipment that exists. So it'll be the most productive equipment.
We're going to have a whole podcast on the big beautiful bill and dig into some of these kind of factors.
But these policies that Trump is pushing they're in every direction, and it gets into, you have states. This gets back to what we were talking about. You have states that are much more business friendly than other states, and they're the states that are going to get the new factories.
Right.
Because they're the most business friendly. And so
why
now,
would you build a big factory that's going to take a lot more of what you produce?
Or that's in taxes, or that's in regulation,
Exactly.
or it's in workman's comp, or it's in tort reform.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of different state level issues that fall under the general category of business friendly or business hostile. Tennessee happens to be a very business friendly state.
Yes.
And so it's going to be very interesting to watch and see where the right to work states are more business friendly than states that do not have a right to work law. And so the states that lean the farthest left are the ones that are the least likely to benefit from new factories with great equipment and higher wages in their states.
Because they impose more burdens on them.
Yes. And so now we're back to our discussion about a city. And by the way, cities had the same thing. Famously, Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, chased Amazon out of New York. But for some reason, I don't even remember what it was, but it was like 10,000 jobs that were going to be paying an average of $120,000 a job in her district. And she chased them out, and they ended up they're in a lot of those people are now living in Nashville, because Nashville and Washington D.C. were the three, that and New York were the three cities that were going to get
Nashville
that.
got kind of the third award as the logistical hub, and
that's growing and growing and growing.
Yeah.
So at any rate, so you have the cities that have jurisdictions and that have laws that affect not just the people, but the people who are thinking about coming. Then you have the states, and then you now have for the first time in my lifetime, you have a president who thinks in terms of a country that as president that he should be representing as much as he can the people, the citizens of the United States, as opposed to thinking as a globalist. Because for my lifetime, even going all the way back to Reagan, which would be kind of the beginning of when I would describe myself as a thinking adult. I kind of put 1979 when I went to one conference that was a big aha moment for me. But I was 30 years old, and that's when I started to become really aware of the effect of laws and economic policy on growth and opportunities.
There's two points I want to make that we've kind of raced beyond. One was you're talking about Trump's using deal making to address, even potential wars, basically using the access to our market as a huge stick to conform behavior around what we want instead of going to war.
Right.
Presidents for decades have jawboned the European countries to spend more of their budget on defense. Yes, great idea, never changed.
Right.
So basically, it left the United States paying the bill for security in the North American continent and also in Western Europe. So I happen to think it's really a great idea that we just have a lot of the way these deals have come out. We have zero tariffs on our products being sold in those countries. They pay a 15% tariff for products coming into our country. That's to me, a rule of thumb. It's close to a way of saying we're going to give this protection to you, but you're paying for it by these taxes that are imposed on that trade. So there's a little nudge in our favor for things to be done in our country, employ our people.
Well, and my understanding is in regard to Ukraine, Trump has agreed to try to put pressure on Putin to come to terms to resolve that war. That what he's agreed to supply Ukraine with weapons that are paid for by NATO.
Yes.
So it's not going to be U.S. taxpayers per se.
Yes.
Now, we contribute to NATO.
Right.
So to the extent that we contribute to NATO, we're paying a portion of it. but it is only a portion, and that NATO as a whole, this requires the European countries who also want there to be a resolution of the war in Ukraine that leaves Ukraine as a sovereign country. It forces them to pony up, so to speak.
Yes. The other point I wanted to make is you have to realize that Trump is not originally a politician. He was a businessman for most of his career, and particularly he was a real estate business guy. So it's deal after deal after deal. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. He sees himself as a deal maker. So he is very creative at finding ways of taking out positions that he'll retreat from, that drive some people crazy. Like, why would you even say that? You're abandoning our NATO allies. I'm setting out a position to tell you, if you don't move my way, it's going to be very painful for you.
Right.
It's like Khrushchev in the early 60s taking off his shoe and beating it on the table at the UN.
Yes.
Well, it basically said, I'm crazy and, don't push me too far or I might do something crazy. It's just good negotiating behavior.
Well, and the results are now, we're going to see the results one way or the other. You have people who predicted, James Carville, kind of to me famously predicted in February, after Trump came out with all of these original tariffs, Carville came out and said that the economy will collapse within 90 days and Trump's popularity will be historically low. And so Carville turned out so far not to be correct.
Right.
And so let's talk a little bit about now. So what we've done here, we've talked about. So let's talk a little bit about sovereignty, and I guess we're talking a lot about that now. In that sovereignty in the United States, Nashville, Tennessee, is obviously we're the capital city of Tennessee, and we have a mayor and we have a city council, and but in the past, our city council has passed some ordinances or laws that the legislature of Tennessee didn't like, and so when the legislature came into session after those particular laws passed, the legislature passed a law saying that no city can do such and such. So it essentially overruled the law, and our state constitution clearly says that the state has sovereignty over the cities.
Yes.
And then our U.S. Constitution there are some issues where the U.S. government has sovereignty over the states, but there are also some where states are sovereign.
So, this is really critical because it's subtle and nuanced and hard and not clearly one way or the other. We've talked about how there was, in the original drafting of the Constitution, there was a fight over the enumeration of rights, which is to say, or enumeration of powers. That the federal government could do only what the Constitution authorized it to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so sovereignty is authority. It's pretty similar, basically the same thing.
Who has the power to do something?
Right.
The legal power to do something.
And so we were originally set up as a confederation of states, the Constitution, and it was called the Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution was.
Right.
So they replaced that with what we now have as a Constitution, strengthened the central authority, but still had this theme of whatever we haven't said the federal government can do, it's left to the states to manage on their own. And that was things like police power, a lot of adjudication, but roads, healthcare,
all of those things used to be state only.
State only.
Federal government did not have any authority prior to Roosevelt to do any of those things.
Yeah.
The federal powers were very limited. When Calvin Coolidge gave a speech in 1923, which is 100 years ago, that's a long time, but still, it was 150 years after the founding of the country, total federal spending, he pointed out in his speech, was $2.3 billion. That was it. Right. And 2/3 of that was military, was defense spending.
Right.
And so we were only spending $800 million we're now spending 10,000 times, almost 10,000 times that much on non-defense spending. And so
growing into a habit of thinking that things are decided in Washington and they tell everyone else what to do.
Right.
Everyone else has to follow the policy. So when we talk about federal sovereignty over the states, it has to be couched in these terms because it's not absolute. There's some ways in which the states have to conform to, say, the amendments to the Constitution. But there's a lot of ferment and fight about in what ways and to what degree and who's telling who what to do and et cetera.
Yeah.
Good lawyers would understand this a lot better than me.
Well, but what's going on right now under Trump's presidency is a kind of a battle between, and Trump's actually trying to push a lot of the power and authority
back to the states
and responsibility back to the states.
Well, this is what the Dodd decision, I think was the name of the abortion decision, said, we shouldn't be deciding this at a Supreme Court level.
Well, that was one,
the
and the Chevron decision was an economic one where the regulatory agencies had vast power for 40 years. And the Chevron decision took that away from the federal government. And I'm not saying it then gave it to the states. It just took it away from the federal government. That the regulators themselves do not have the right, the authority to make laws. And so this question, and we're seeing all this battle, we're seeing all this play out. For me, I'm 77 years old, and I've never seen the rate of change from a political standpoint, from an economic standpoint, technology standpoint. It's mind-boggling. For people who are 20, there's so many things that they accept as
norms,
as norms that have always been.
Yeah.
But I can remember back when telecommunications was so archaic and so. The changes that I've seen are just amazing, and I marvel at them. I truly do.
You're talking about in this year under the Trump administration.
The political side of things is moving in just 7 months.
Yes.
It's moving at a pace that it's more than any 10-year period in 7 months.
Yeah.
And that part of that, I think, is the pressure. I think part of the reason for that is that federal debt has gotten to be so great that we can manage it at this level. But if federal debt continued to increase at the rate that it has been increasing the last 4 or 5 years, if it continued to do that for another 10 years, something really
the
terrible,
snowball is too big.
Something terrible would happen.
Yeah.
And so there's pressure to change.
I think I've read that this level of indebtedness is fairly similar to what the U.S. was in after World War II. But then we had several decades of really strong economic performance, and the debt that it was in place at that time became much smaller as a percentage of the overall economy.
Right, and the debt that had accumulated in a 5-year period.
Yes.
To finance the war.
Yes.
And then when the war ended, all that spending dropped.
Yes.
And so now you have under Trump, you have a push to control spending and to reduce the power of the federal government. It's interesting to me that he is called a dictator, and so here's a dictator who is trying to reduce the regulatory power of government by 50%. He's trying to do it in 1 year. Well, to me, if I'm a dictator, I'm not trying to reduce my power, but he is trying to reduce the power of the regulatory branches of government in Washington
and the spending
and the spending
and the economy's growth.
Yes,
in relation to that spending, and so he would be recapitulating what the U.S. did from the '60s through probably the '90s, I guess, speaking roughly.
Yeah,
I find that a really intriguing idea that we can get out of this corner we're in, but that's the formula to do it, and he's executing on it.
Well, you and I think he is.
Yes,
that's what in elections, as everybody, Barack Obama famously said, elections have consequences, and Trump has said elections have consequences. Right. So the two of them, he said, well, that's why we have elections, is so that if we want to change policies, we have elections to do that, so that the people can speak.
Sure.
And so that's how our system works. And so we've kind of covered the sovereignty. We've and as to how that lays out. Let's talk a little bit about, Mike, the media and branding.
I want to do something else before we go to that.
Sure.
First, I want to say you and I have about a 40-year history of picking at each other's words.
Yes.
We've had some fun with that in this conversation here. I think the deep underlying point of that is that precision in words matters.
Yes.
And the content of the topic of today's podcast is really trying to pull back the curtain on some words that we're using that are poorly understood, poorly expressed, poorly managed.
Or that mean nothing. So, for example, if I said I'm a citizen of the world,
Yes.
how would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, what does citizenship mean? And that's where we started this podcast.
There is no world citizenship. There is none.
Yes.
So you can't be a citizen of the world. Would be, to me, it would be like being a citizen of a country in Europe where you have the right under the European Union to move about Europe freely. But if you're an American, you don't have that right in Europe. So you can't be there is no such thing as a citizen of the world.
Well, there's no literal meaning of it. But, there's something someone's trying to express when they say that. And I think along the lines of I'm not partisan, I'm not overly connected to my own country. I wish well for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
There's this kind of equanimity of everybody live on their own and let's get along.
Yeah.
That's what I hear in that, but it has no literal meaning.
Well, and what I guess what I'm suggesting is that in a society where words mean like they do in the Queen in Alice in Wonderland, where they mean exactly what I say they mean, nothing more, nothing less. If somebody says I'm a citizen of the world, I would say that's not possible. You can say whatever else you want to, but you can't claim you're something that's not possible.
So, I really love epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy that studies what we know and how we know it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a strong current of that in what we're talking about. What's
Yes.
objective truth? What's subjective truth? We're plagued by that. It fights over that. And when we use these words like citizen of the world, people are hearing different things when you say that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it leads to alienation, I think.
Right.
We're not talking to one another. We're talking past one another because I mean A and you mean B.
Right.
And they don't work together.
Right.
Let's talk before we go to the media and how it's dealing with all this. There's a concept in here of statehood that we haven't talked about. It's like citizenship. What is a state? You particularly have this in the Middle East right now with the Palestinian state. France has just said they're going to recognize the Palestinian state. England has also said they're going to do that this fall. Now, there is no Palestinian state, literally. Okay, back to the point we were just making. There may be conceptually this idea that these people are bound together in some way and we're going to authorize them to have some sovereignty. But it's a big fog of ambiguity in terms of how does that really work? What does it really mean? Who gets what power?
Mm-hmm.
Who has what rights, et cetera. So I think
there's a geographic area that is called Gaza, and there's a geographic area that is called, I believe they call it the West Bank.
Yes.
And those are the two areas that the West Bank is kind of, I don't know if it's part of Israel, but it's surrounded by Israel on 3/4 of the side. Gaza is bordered by Israel,
Egypt on the south.
and then is it
Mediterranean
Sea. And Gaza is I guess it was a political entity in that the Gazans about 20 years ago elected Hamas ran for office, won, and has not held an election since.
Right.
So it is a legal entity, but it's not a state. It's a geographic area.
Yes. And, Palestine is an old word, centuries, maybe millennia old, back to the Roman days. I think it's actually maybe a Roman word. But Arabs think that Palestine is all of that area, including Israel.
Right.
And that Israel is basically a bacteria that's been inserted in the middle of it that needs to be expelled.
Right.
That's kind of the nature of their attitude.
And that goes all the way back to David and Goliath. It goes
to ancient biblical times.
Ancient biblical times. Yeah. You had the Israelites.
Yeah.
And they were fighting. They were fighting with various groups that were. I don't know if they were all considered Arabs. You have Persians, you have Palestinians. You had different, but they were
basically tribes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And not even to feudalism yet. That much later in Europe. This is tribes. And actually, I saw an interesting article about an Arab tribal leader who thinks that maybe one of the solutions is to organize Palestine or Palestinians in terms of their tribal affiliation, because Arab culture really respects tribal leaders, and they may be able to discipline and conform behavior in ways that the Palestine Liberation Organization has not done, Hamas has not done. Those are not effective governing bodies. They're not states. And one of the levels of resistance to all this statehood and stuff is that no foreign government has anybody they can work with. At Hamas, at PLO, they're ineffective. They just don't have the institutions of a state.
Well, we'll see how that. I mean, that is the one area. The rest of the area, the Middle East. You have a new regime in Syria, and we'll see how that plays out. Iran has been
wobbly.
They have been negatively affected, and the sanctions are making it very difficult for Iran to export their ideas on terrorism. Hezbollah, the Houthis, all of these various organizations. They've not necessarily been decapitated, but the Houthis have decided that it's not in their interests to be violent as they were. Iran is clearly not doing what they were. Hezbollah is more or less non-existent now. So these are all things. So, but getting back to, I don't want to get into the Middle Eastern policy. The issue of statehood. We're not talking about United States states. We're talking about what is a governing entity.
Yeah.
And so
you have a lot of failed states in that part of the world. You have Rwanda and Somalia and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Iraq basically is a failed state. It was put together after World War II with Kurds and Sunni and Shia and people that have
they now have they don't have the Saddam Hussein dictatorship.
Right.
And I don't know. I know the Kurds see themselves as a very different population than others, than Iranians or Persians, and they see themselves as different. So this tribal concept may be kind of part of what you see in breaking up. But as you point out, in Africa, there are countries that we could call a failed state.
Yeah.
So a state doesn't necessarily have to be something like we think of as a state, as a sub part of a country.
You don't have the rule of law. You don't have a common defense in these countries. You basically have large expanses of area that are exploited by ISIS and others that just move in and do what they want to do. It's kind of like what we had in Seattle, where people moved in and built an encampment, and they said law enforcement doesn't come in here.
Well, but that was allowed by the city.
It was
allowed by the state of Washington.
Yeah.
It was allowed. In these other ones, it's not allowed. I mean, in other words, there's nobody who could stop it if they wanted to. In these failed states that you're talking about. So I'm not going to call Washington a failed state. I'm going to call it a state that has chosen to
fail,
to allow certain things to happen within their borders that wouldn't be allowed to happen in some other states within the United States.
Well, this is part of the pattern we're trying to chase, which is that there are failed cities here. In my opinion, Chicago is a failed city.
I think you're right.
It cannot pay its bills. I think Los Angeles is becoming a failed city. It doesn't enforce basic safety in its confines. It lets fires eat up big parts of the city with no consequence. It's just horrible.
But here's what's the question, Michael, and that is that they have elections. The elections are generally fair in these cities that you are that you're alluding to. The mayor of Chicago, the last time I saw his approval rating was 11%.
Mm-hmm.
The last mayor's approval rating when she ran for re-election, Lori Lightfoot, was under 20%.
Mm-hmm.
why do the citizens of these cities continuously elect people who fail as governing as mayors and governing bodies?
It's a great question,
Yeah.
you know, and why doesn't democracy seem to work as it should in putting in good governance? You know, people, like Ben Franklin said, once you can vote yourself money out of the treasury, you know, our country will last until people discover that, and a lot of unions have discovered how to do that.
Do you think that is the main driving force, the government employee unions in these major cities? Do you think that their power and their money is so great that to be competitive against their chosen candidate or group of candidates is not possible?
I'm pretty confident it is a good way to describe Chicago.
Yes.
Because of the firefighters and the police and the teachers and what they demand in terms of pensions.
Yep.
No matter what else goes bad, they're going to get their pensions.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with the CalPERS, the government employee unions in California generally, not just Los Angeles.
Yep.
I think those are major drivers of their dysfunction.
Okay.
And you'd think that they're some of the most developed parts of our society, of our culture.
Yeah.
And they're, in my opinion, some of the worst.
Yeah, and California, just to put a pin in this, California has 11% of the population of the United States. They have 24% of the government employee unions members are in California.
Mm-hmm.
And so the government employee unions in California have enormous political power in compared to the percentage of the population within the state.
Right.
And so we can, some future podcast, we ought to focus on the different driving forces within our political system, and government employee unions will certainly be one of them.
And let's just mention gerrymandering here, because there's a current case where the Democrats are leaving Texas because Republicans want to gerrymander those districts.
Well, legislators from Texas are trying to keep. Texans aren't leaving Texas. The
legislators.
Yeah.
Well, and the legislators, I think, are Texans.
Yeah.
So I'm not as precise in my language,
Yeah.
but the point I'm trying to make is the Republicans are trying to gerrymander the districts, okay? And the Democrats just think this is awful. It's very much to their disadvantage. Of course, it is awful to them. But they go to Chicago to run away, and they're already gerrymandered in Chicago. California is already gerrymandered. I think in the popular vote,
In Illinois, 47% of the people in Illinois voted for Trump. There are 17 congressional seats in Illinois. 3 are Republican, 14 are Democrat.
Yes.
Now, the funniest one of all was the governor of Massachusetts, who in response to a question threatened that if Texas is successful, if the Republicans in Texas are successful in their redistricting effort, that she will personally redistrict Massachusetts to eliminate any chance of a Republican being a member of Congress. The problem is there are no Republican members of Congress in Massachusetts now.
So they're gerrymandered too.
They're clearly.
Yeah. California is already gerrymandered.
Yeah. So Democrats have learned and have practiced gerrymandering, and gerrymandering is there are some rules and laws about gerrymandering. In New York, the governor Hochul tried to gerrymander New York so badly that the New York Supreme Court ruled that what she was attempting to do was unconstitutional under the Constitution of New York.
New York.
And so what's happening in Texas is, for Republicans, it's a bit of a belated response to catching up.
Yeah.
And it is likely to succeed.
Yes.
At some point, but it is interesting to see how the back and forth goes. And
what's going to change between now and 2030 is astounding. With the new census, if Trump is successful in bringing off a new census that counts only citizens, and apportionment is changed, as it always is every 10 years, based on the census. And if you have some of these movements to challenge what's going on in these failed states and cities. I think, by the way, New York is becoming a candidate to be a failed city. It was once before, when
in the 70s.
When there was that famous headline, forward to New York, drop dead, because they weren't going to bail them out of what they had done.
Right.
We're going to get to that point again, I think. It's predictable. And if Mamdani is elected, if he carries out his policies, I'm pretty highly confident it's going to get to a point of crisis in a similar way.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if he is elected. It'll be interesting to see what of his promises he even attempts to do. It'll be interesting to see that.
So we've tried to tie together some vagaries around 4 concepts: citizenship, statehood, sovereignty, and what is the 4th one we had? My notes are
media. We were
going.
Is
that the 4th one? Because we wanted to go that how the media is dealing with all of this.
Yes, and how media has identified, because media now is there's so many different places where people can go to get news.
Yes.
My college age grandchildren, I ask them, how do you get your news? And they look at me and say, well, it's in my news feed. And I say, because I don't have a news feed. So I say, well, how does that work? And they'll say, well, I have a news feed on my phone that feeds me stories that I'm interested in. And I say, well, how does it know what you're interested in? And he said, well, if I click on a story, then I'm showing that I'm interested in that story. And so it's kind of a self-perpetuating.
Yeah, the algorithms are looking at what you like and trying to give you more of what you like to get more of your attention.
My granddaughter, when there were a number of female college students who were brutally murdered or kidnapped, she was getting ready to go to college. So she read those stories. She clicked on and read those stories. And she said, Granddad, she said, for a period of time, all I got was stories on rape and violence and murder. And so
it's a built-in reality distortion field.
Yes, exactly. And so people are they receive, and it's not even conscious on their part. The news is filtered so that they're getting more of the same slant on the news. And so now you get, and that's Google and Microsoft and all of these tech companies, Facebook, that are feeding stories that are the same as the stories they've clicked on. And so then you have CNN and MSNBC. And so, you've had people who say, and their audiences compared to Fox, their audience is very small. I mean, CNN's audience compared to Fox is like maybe 10%, 15% of the size of Fox. And so people have said, well, why don't they expand? And of course they have this fellow named Scott Jennings, who is on Abby Phillips' show, and he is a conservative on that show and does a great job against usually 4 or 5 people who are of the left, who are not conservative. He does a good job of responding to them.
You have 1 conservative and 4 or 5 liberals.
Now, I don't watch her show, but a lot of the places that I consciously go to get news will have a little story and a link to a 20-second soundbite of Scott Jennings responding on some issue, and I'll generally watch those because they're kind of humorous. Mm-hmm. I enjoy seeing kind of how people respond under pressure, and so it's interesting. Yeah. But it doesn't cause me to watch the whole show.
Yeah,
I just watch the clip.
Right.
And if CNN were to change and try to broaden its appeal, the question is, would they lose a share of their existing audience to, say, MSNBC if MSNBC doesn't make the change? Because MSNBC is far left. Then you have Stephen Colbert, whose show is being terminated. Now, I will say this, that when his show was I don't watch his show. I'm in bed by then.
Mm-hmm.
But when his show was terminated, and I learned that there are 200 people who are employed to do a 1 hour show, that was mind boggling to me. I don't know how it seems like you'd have too many people where you couldn't even do a show.
You'd have to hire more people to coordinate the ones
people
that are there.
Yeah. What do 200 people do? Now, I also heard that Howard Stern's show is not going to be renewed at anywhere near the
price he wants.
The Sirius has been paying him.
Mm-hmm.
That shoe is coming. He has 90 people on his staff, 90 people to do a Sirius podcast on Sirius Radio, not Sirius. Sirius the brand. What do 90 people do? I mean, do you have any idea what?
Well, you have all kinds of business models that are built up around large employment kind of assumptions.
Yeah.
The wire services are that way.
Okay.
Associated Press and all that.
Yes.
International workforces. There's a lot in all these. What am I trying to think? NPGs, the governmental, quasi-governmental things.
Yes.
Huge amount of employment.
Yes.
For people that leave an administration that has been lost in election. They get jobs in NGOs. That's what I was trying. Non-governmental organizations,
which are now going away.
Oh,
they're being greatly stripped.
Stripping that out.
Yeah.
So a lot of that unemployment is going away. The expense of it is going away. I think it's a necessary adjustment for people to find things that make economic sense. TV went through this even in COVID. You started having all these reality shows because they were cheap to produce. In the 60s, you had game shows because all the sitcoms were too expensive to produce.
Well, one of Martha McCallum, the other day, she was talking about the Colbert and the number of people, and she commented. She said that she was the Fox anchor who was sent to Rome when the new pope was going to be picked.
This past year.
And she was talking to her CBS counterpart, who was the anchor, whoever the top anchor was for CBS. And they got into a discussion about their staff that was there in Rome supporting them. Martha McCallum had a total of 10 people. CBS had 100. To do the same thing, to report on the very same story. So media, as we think of it, as we're talking about this, we're really kind of bouncing around the subject of media, but it's fascinating how I think much of media is over the next 36 months, over the next 3 years. I think you're going to see all kinds of changes and shrinkage of these media programs. I would imagine without knowledge, I'm guessing that a big part of Stephen Colbert's employment grouping has to do with unions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll bet it does.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's true, then that probably means that the other nighttime folks have similar staffs and their audience is shrinking. And so if the unions won't...
It's shrinking in terms of being more fragmented and people...
in terms of their audience.
Yeah.
So their advertising revenue is shrinking. Colbert Show lost $40 million a year. And that was like out of $100 million of revenue. So that's
the question I was trying to ask, the population is not shrinking, but if they're losing audience, that means they're going somewhere else, or maybe they're just not consuming news. I don't know.
Yeah.
But when I say fragmentation, my guess is that people are choosing to get their information or entertainment from other sources.
Right. And so the consequence of that is that if the union rules don't allow these news organizations to shrink their staff, to make it, to right size their staff, then what CBS chose to do is to terminate the entire show.
Right.
So in other words, they've said no mas. We're not going to try to because if we replace Stephen Colbert, we'll still have this giant staff.
Right.
That if my assumption is correct, that's being driven by unions in
demands.
New York City.
Yeah.
Union demands. And so
we're kind of approaching this from an economic standpoint,
yes,
in what we've talked about.
I think there's a lot of economics that are involved in what's going to happen in the media. It's also economics, but it's also how these algorithms and things are dividing so that people are getting news that supports their point of view, whether or not the news is completely accurate. I'll give a good example. This lady who is head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics that Trump just recently fired. I've had conversations with people who said, why is Trump firing somebody for making one mistake? And I said, why do you think that it was only one mistake? Where did you get that information? And now they're kind of stumped because they thought that what they received as information was accurate.
Was valid.
It was valid. It turns out that she's been inaccurate for at least 2 years in the same direction, wildly inaccurate in the same direction for 2 years. Well, if people are relying, if the public in any way is relying on the data that is put out by this Department of Government, and it is wrong significantly, materially every time, why even have it? So what Trump is doing is he's replacing that person and hiring somebody who hopefully will be able to gather data and provide accurate information.
When you talk about reliance, the word that comes to mind for me is trust. Whose information do you trust?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think we've talked about economics. There's a very heavy component here about trust. It's a moral dimension to this, and people. Your friend has trusted her source that turned out to be wrong. Mm-hmm. What do you do when you find out that you've been being misled by someone you trusted? Mm-hmm. You've been betrayed in a sense. Mm-hmm. And, there's plenty of spin coming from all corners of the political spectrum.
That's correct.
And so how do you reestablish trust? And I just want to make a point here. I went to a business school reunion years ago, and one of the professors at the place where I went to business school studies trust. And I've always had the idea that trust, once betrayed, is broken and very hard to reconstruct. An adultery, a financial fraud, those kinds of things.
Sure.
How can you ever trust somebody that has done that to you before?
Right.
Related kind of questions. And what she says is that trust can be rebuilt, and it's based on 3 things: logic, authenticity, and empathy. And what she means by that is competence. Is your logic in order? Are you making sense? Does this pass the smell test analytically, rationally?
Okay.
Right. I still may not trust you. You're smart. You do good math, but you're contorting it in some way. And so that's her other piece is empathy. Are you here showing up for me? Do you have my interests in mind? Or are you trying to sell me something that I accept and benefits you instead of me?
Right.
She's gay.
Okay.
And so I get the sense that she's had a lot of experience with this where, people pretend that she's not, or, they got some agenda around her sexuality, and you can't really trust somebody that is not empathetic. You see the point that I'm making?
Yeah. Do they have an agenda that is contrary to hers?
Yeah, that's right.
And so if their agenda is contrary to hers, then it's almost impossible for the two of them to
trust in one another.
To trust each other.
Yeah,
trust each other.
Yeah, authenticity is the third one.
Okay.
So you have to have good logic. You have to be authentic, which is showing up to be really who you are and not what you're pretending to be so you can make the sale. Right?
Okay.
I don't trust somebody that's trying to put one over on me. And
right.
And the other
fool
one is,
me once, that old expression, fool me once, shame on you. And fool me.
I just think there's a lot of richness in that, because I spent decades thinking trust, once broken, can't be rebuilt. She disputes that. Her scholarship says otherwise.
But what do you say to somebody who likes to listen to news that is slanted in a direction that they like, even though they learn that a lot of what they are hearing is inaccurate?
So all of us want to believe what we wish to be true.
Okay.
Okay. That is a universal truth of humanity. Mm-hmm. Also, there is no improvement if we're already 100% correct. Okay? We're not going to improve and get better and have a better understanding of things if we just keep repeating and reinforcing what we already know and understand, or think we know and think we understand. So it's healthy to be constantly presented with variant viewpoints, maybe even conflicting or, hostile viewpoints, because we can look at them again and see if there's any merit in that. We're unlikely to get that from people that are telling us what we want to believe.
Well,
Easy.
no, I'm not talking about relationships. I'm talking about sources of information where a person chooses, I want to get my information from a particular source.
Yeah, I think it is a relationship. It's, do I trust that source?
Well, but I guess what I'm saying is if that source regularly, the Bureau of Labor Statistics lady is an example.
Yeah.
Okay. She for 2 years, every time she gave a report, it was wrong.
Well, of course, I now don't trust her. Once I learn that, I can't trust her.
Okay.
Unless.
But what if you keep going back to her then?
Pretty foolish.
What if you keep going back to her?
I keep being misled.
Okay. But are you being misled because you want to be misled? And that's what I'm saying. If there's certain news outlets that consistently report that predict things that then don't happen.
That's well put. If people are telling me a misleading thing that happens to be what I wish to be true,
but it's not, and then it turns out to be demonstrably what you were told was not true.
Right.
But you keep going back to that same source.
Wishing what you wish to be true, you still wish it to be true.
Well, but you're going to the same sources that doesn't change.
Sure.
And so that to me is the media today is so fragmented that each media outlet has an audience that sustains it financially. And if they are reporting stuff that is appealing to that audience, there's some audiences that want to be. I mean, when George W. Bush was president, his ratings kept dropping and dropping and dropping. But when he left his presidency, it was around 25%. That's very, very low. That is incredibly low for a president who won with approximately 50%. That means that half of the people who voted for that person now don't have confidence in that person. You have to do a lot of things to fall that far. But yet there were still people who liked getting information that kept them fueled, whichever it was. And so that's just what I think is. I don't know exactly what to make of it, because it used to be that there were only a relatively small number of sources of news. Now there's an infinite number, and now in addition to infinite places to go to get news, you now have algorithms that are feeding you news. So it's going to be interesting.
I think we have a lot of work to do, each of us, to reevaluate and restructure what we trust and what we rely on. There's one thing I'd like to insert. I think we're probably getting long and need to bring this to a close. Yeah. There's a new sheriff in town. Okay. And so you see Colbert being fired. You see Paramount settling a lawsuit. You see CBS settling a lawsuit from Trump.
ABC settled a lawsuit.
You see Netanyahu yesterday said that he thinks New York Times should be sued. Okay. So this is pretty remarkable. And I'm wondering where this leads, because there are now defections, I think, from these people that have held the line for all this time, that the bureaucracy is reliable, that it's genuine, that it's doing things on behalf of all of our interests. I think that belief in that facade is cracking.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay. And a lot of pieces are falling away from this old way of thinking. And even traditionally leftist media companies starting to accede to the new sheriff. Now, people that are on the left just are panicked by this, right? It's very threatening.
Yeah, you had the fact checker from the Washington Post just resigned.
Yeah,
and he said they gave me it's kind of a choice. You can either take this buyout package, or you can remain employed at your own risk.
Yeah.
So he took the buyout package.
Yeah.
Okay.
The one that
because he wasn't going to change. In other words, what he was essentially saying is, I'm not capable of changing the way I fact check.
Yes.
And so I better take the buyout package.
So maybe it's not facts,
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And the Washington Bezos, and this is going to be interesting.
I was just about to say, this is the one that amuses me. He said, we're going to adhere to an ethic of free people and free market.
Right.
That's beautiful to me.
Yeah.
You know, I think Bezos is probably a man of the left, but I really respect the way that he had characterized that. And you have mass defection from the Washington. We can't live with that.
Right.
We're not going to be told to defend free markets and free people. What does that tell you?
Yeah. So anyway, well, we'll end it. We'll end it on that uncertain note to be picked up in future podcasts, because this is what we do. This is the world we live in now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.